I trusted him with my life, but instead, he tried to end it. When betrayal comes from within your own family, it cuts deeper than any blade, and the scars never fade. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Ethan Cole, and I have lived long enough to know that life has a way of disguising storms behind the calmest skies. I am 62 years old now, retired from my years as an aerospace engineer, and these days I spend most mornings in the quiet harbor town of Camden, Maine. The gulls cry over the fishing boats, the fog lifts slowly from the bay, and the smell of salt water mixes with the faint sweetness of waffles my wife makes in our old iron press. Margaret, though everyone calls her Mags, moves through our kitchen like a keeper of traditions. She sets the radio to a station that still plays Sinatra, humming while she pours my coffee. Our life together has always been built on simple rhythms, the kind you think will last forever. Mags is 60 now, and I still see the girl I met at a college library, balancing too many books in her arms. After 35 years of marriage, she is the anchor of my days. We walk each evening along the waterfront, even when the wind turns sharp, and she slips her hand into mine with the same ease she did when we were young. Our dream for retirement has been modest: to travel slowly along the New England coast, to see the leaves turn crimson in Vermont, to watch the first snowfall in the White Mountains, to live out the rest of our days without rushing. We built that dream with our own hands. For decades, I ran a woodworking shop, crafting maple tables and rocking chairs. Mags kept the books, chatted with customers, and turned the store into a place neighbors lingered in. Bit by bit, we sold the business when my back grew stiff, and my eyes too tired to measure the smallest joints. The money became the foundation of our savings, folded into a revocable living trust that our lawyer, Conrad Avery, helped us arrange. The trust was fair, balanced, designed to provide for our family without favoritism. It gave me peace, a sense that the fruits of our labor would never be wasted. Our family is not large. We have one daughter, Lena, who is 35 now. She was always sharp, quicker with numbers than I ever was, and she built her career in finance down in Boston. She married Trent Walker, a man 3 years older than her, who introduced himself to me as a tech entrepreneur. I remember the first handshake, warm, practiced, a salesman's grip. He spoke in polished phrases, always ready with a compliment, but his eyes never held steady on mine. Still, Lena loved him, and for that alone I chose to set aside my unease. At their wedding, Mags wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, and Lena glowed the way only a bride can. The photographs from that day still line our hallway. I have studied them more than once, and I notice what others don't. In almost every frame, Trent is glancing away, as though distracted by something just out of view. Only in the pose shot before the minister does he look straight into the camera, and even then, the smile doesn't quite reach his eyes. Our home carries other reminders of family life. In the living room hangs a clock that belonged to my grandfather, its pendulum clicking like a heartbeat. On the mantle rests a framed copy of the deed to our house signed by my father when he passed it on to us. Every item, every corner, tells a story of labor and legacy. It is what I wanted to pass down, not just money, but the sense that dignity is carved into wood and written into honest work. Yet even in this portrait of contentment, I sensed shadows. Trent never stopped speaking of opportunities, of investments that promised more than common sense would allow. He once leaned across my dinner table and said, "Ethan, your generation thinks too small." I laughed politely, but inside I thought, big words from a man who has never sanded a table until his hands blistered. Mags has always trusted her intuition, and she told me more than once, "That boy talks fast because he's hiding something." I brushed it off, reminding her that Lena's happiness mattered most. Perhaps that was my mistake, believing that love for our daughter required silence about my doubts. Looking back, I wish I had read the signs more clearly. The world I had built with patience and honesty was already being measured by someone else in terms of dollars and opportunities. What I thought was a family dinner was, in his eyes, a negotiation. What I considered a gift of trust would become a target. I remember one evening, standing at the harbor as the sun dipped low, Mag squeezed my arm and said, "Do you think we'll really get to see Vermont this fall?" I told her of course we would, that nothing could keep us from it. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt the tide shift. I had no way of knowing that the greatest danger would not come from illness or accident, but from the very man who married my daughter. The sea was calm that night, the stars sharp and bright. I thought life had settled into its final, gentle chapter. I could not yet see that the calm was only the pause before a storm, and that the man sitting across from me at the dinner table would one day stand behind me at the edge of a cliff. If you're still watching and feeling the weight of this betrayal, please comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now, let's move into chapter 2 and uncover the first sign that danger was closer than anyone imagined. It began subtly, so subtly that if I had not been paying attention, I might have mistaken it for a simple family interest. Trent started showing up more often at our house. He would arrive with a smile and some small gift, fresh bread from a bakery in town, or a bouquet of flowers for Mags. On the surface, these gestures looked thoughtful, the way a son-in-law might show appreciation. But underneath the smiles, his questions became less about how we were feeling and more about what we were planning with our money. He often leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping coffee, while asking about the trust we had set up with Conrad Avery. "You know, Ethan," he would say, "consolidating everything under one manager would really save a lot of headaches later." I would nod politely, not answering right away, while Mag stood at the sink pretending to wash dishes but stiffening at every word. The warmth of a casual visit was being replaced by the cold edge of financial curiosity. One Sunday afternoon, Trent walked through the living room and ran his hand along the carved banister of our staircase. "This place is beautiful," he said, his voice smooth, "but don't you think it's too big for just the two of you? You could sell it, move into something smaller, and keep the profit for travel or health care." I looked at him steadily. "This house isn't just wood and nails, Trent. It's our life," Mags added firmly. "Every corner here has our memories. We're not leaving." For just a second, I saw his smile falter, and in his eyes a flash of irritation, quick as lightning, but enough to leave me chilled. Lena tried to soften things when she came to visit. "Dad, Mom, Trent only means well," she said, sitting at the edge of the sofa. But her voice trembled, and she twisted the strap of her purse while speaking. I recognized that nervous gesture from when she was a child, caught between telling the truth and covering for a friend. She wanted us to believe Trent was simply practical, but her unease told me another story. Pressure was being applied, and she was caught in the middle. That week, Conrad called me to his office. He poured coffee and leaned across his desk. "Ethan, I need to tell you something odd. Someone has been asking specific questions about the survivorship clauses in your trust. It's not illegal to ask, but it's unusual." My stomach tightened. "Do you know who?" Conrad shook his head. "Not directly, but my guess is someone close. Be cautious." I walked out of his office into the salty air of Camden Harbor, feeling the wind colder than usual. Why would anyone be so interested in the conditions that only apply if both Mags and I were gone? Little things began to stack up, like pebbles forming a wall. I noticed an insurance brochure left on our coffee table after Trent's visit. He laughed it off when I asked, saying he must have grabbed it by mistake from his office, but the coincidence was too neat. Lena, at dinner one evening, slipped and said, "Life would be simpler with one decision maker." When I asked what she meant, she grew flustered and changed the subject. The pieces didn't fit, but they formed a picture I could no longer ignore. Mags whispered one night while we sat on the porch, "If we ever go hiking with him, promise me you'll walk on the inside, away from the cliff." She said it like a joke, but her hand squeezed mine with a seriousness that made me swallow hard. She has always trusted her instincts, and I have learned that ignoring them is dangerous. The air in our home began to feel heavier. Trent's footsteps in our hallway echoed longer than they should. His questions about insurance and trusts lingered after he left. settling like dust that could not be cleaned. I found myself replaying every conversation, every glance, every hesitation in Lena's eyes. Was I being paranoid, or was I finally seeing what had been there all along? By the end of that month, I understood something clearly. Trent was no longer just a son-in-law trying to help. He was studying us, testing the edges of our defenses, probing for weaknesses. And though nothing had yet happened, I felt the shadow of it pressing closer. Life, which had always felt like the solid wood of my workshop, now seemed like thin glass. The thought that stayed with me as I drifted into uneasy sleep was simple but sharp. The greatest danger to our lives might not come from the outside world, but from the very man who sat across our table with a smile too smooth to be trusted. If you're still watching and finding these twists unsettling, drop a number 2 in the comments to let me know. Now, let's step into Chapter 3, where the first major blow shatters the illusion of safety. The call from Conrad Avery came on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of day when the sky looked like it had been rubbed with ash. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me to answer. Conrad's voice carried the tone of a man who had seen too many strange things in his career. "Ethan," he said, "I need you to come down to my office. Something odd came across my desk, and you should see it for yourself." An hour later, I sat across from him in his wood-paneled office, staring at a faxed form. It was a change of beneficiary request for one of our life insurance policies. At the bottom was my name, scrawled in a handwriting that mimicked mine, but looked rushed, as though copied from memory. My stomach turned cold. "This isn't mine," I said. Conrad nodded grimly. "I knew you'd say that. The insurance company flagged it because the signature didn't match your original. But whoever tried this knew enough about your policy to fill in details only a family member would know." I felt the room tilt slightly. The quiet suspicions that had been swirling in the background suddenly took on sharp edges. That evening, my brother Neil called. He rarely rang except on holidays or birthdays, so his voice caught me off guard. "Ethan," he said, "I came across something today. You know I still have contacts in Portland." Trent's name came up in a lawsuit. He owes a software supplier close to $50,000. He's fighting it, but the case is public record. My pulse hammered in my ears. The pieces began clicking into place. His sudden interest in our finances, his careful probing questions, the irritation when we refused to sell the house. Debt was pushing him, and desperation made dangerous men even more dangerous. Not 2 hours later, headlights swung across our driveway, and Trent himself walked up to the door carrying a pie from a local bakery. "Thought I'd stop by with dessert," he said, flashing his easy grin. He acted like nothing was wrong, chatting about Lena's week in Boston and asking after Mags's garden. But then, with a casual air, he added, "You know, I saw some photos from Otter Cliffs, spectacular views this time of year. Wouldn't it be great to go as a family, take some pictures up there?" He let the word cliffs hang in the air like baited wire. I forced a smile, but my mind snapped a photograph of the moment. Behind the charm was calculation, and behind the suggestion was something darker. After he left, Mags and I sat in silence. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes steady, her voice barely above a whisper. "If it comes to it," she said, "and he pushes, lie still. Pretend you're gone." The words sliced through the quiet like a blade. She was voicing the fear I had tried to bury. We were no longer just talking about money or manipulation. We were talking about survival. That night, I pulled my phone from the charger and opened the voice memo app. I adjusted the settings so it would begin recording automatically if I pressed a hidden side button. I slipped it into the lining of my jacket where no one would think to look. Then I gathered every important document we had: trust papers, account statements, copies of insurance policies, and photographed each one. I stored the images on a secure cloud drive under a folder I named Otter Blue, a phrase only Neil and Conrad would understand if I couldn't explain. My hands shook as I typed the password. It felt strange, preparing for a battle against someone who shared my dinner table. The final blow came the next morning. As I opened the front door to fetch the newspaper, I noticed a manila envelope wedged under the mat. Inside was a photocopied healthcare proxy form, listing Lena as the sole decision-maker should I become incapacitated. The signatures, mine and Mags's, were forged, not even carefully, just bold strokes meant to look convincing at a glance. I stared at the paper, my throat tightening. Someone wasn't just curious about our affairs anymore. Someone was building the paperwork to erase us. I carried the envelope inside, laid it on the table, and watched Mags cover her mouth with both hands. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. "It's starting," she whispered. I nodded, feeling the truth settle into my bones. The game had shifted. We were no longer guarding money, we were guarding our lives. If you're still here and the tension has your heart racing, type number 3 below to show me you're following along. Now, let's move into Chapter 4 and watch how every attempt to fix things only makes them worse. The days that followed were thick with unease, like fog rolling in off the bay and refusing to lift. I tried to steady myself by sticking to my old routines, morning walks, a cup of coffee with Mags, tinkering in the shed. But my mind never strayed far from the forged documents or Conrad's warning. Something had shifted. Trent was no longer just a nuisance. He was a man pressing closer, and every step he took tightened the noose around us. I decided to call Lena one evening, my voice careful, the way a father speaks when he is afraid of pushing too hard. "Sweetheart," I began, "has Trent been having trouble with money?" There was a long pause, the kind that swallows air between two people. Then she said, "Dad, Trent has everything under control." "Please don't worry." Her voice trembled, betraying the lie. I heard the strain in it, the kind of pressure that told me she was standing between loyalty to her husband and fear of losing her parents. When she hung up, I sat staring at the phone, realizing she was not the ally I had hoped for. The next morning, I went to the local bank. I asked to speak privately with the branch manager, a man I had known for years. I explained that I wanted to freeze certain accounts, just as a precaution. He frowned, flipping through files. "Mr. Cole," he said, "someone has already requested documents for access. The request wasn't completed because your signature was required, but the inquiry was detailed, too detailed for a stranger." My chest tightened. "I never authorized that," I said firmly. He nodded. "For now, you're safe, but if a power of attorney is presented, things could change." I walked out into the cold wind, realizing how close Trent already was to slipping his hand into everything we had built. That night, the danger came closer to home. After dinner, Mags wrinkled her nose. "Do you smell that?" she asked. I walked into the kitchen and felt my stomach lurch. A faint hiss filled the air. The stove knobs had been turned just enough for gas to leak, though no flame was lit. We hadn't touched them all day. My hands shook as I twisted them off. Mags clutched the counter, pale. We stood in silence, both of us knowing this was no accident. Someone had been inside our house, or worse, someone wanted us to think the air in our own kitchen could kill us. It was a message as clear as if it had been carved into the walls. We were vulnerable, and we were being tested. The following day, I took the forged healthcare proxy form to Conrad. He studied it, tapping his pen against the desk. "This is criminal forgery," he said, "but without proof of who delivered it, we can't prosecute." Courts need more than suspicion. His words frustrated me, but he leaned forward, voice firm. "Start keeping a record, Ethan. Every visit, every strange occurrence, a journal of details. Patterns are evidence I promised I would." That night, I bought a leather-bound notebook and began writing. Each word felt like a stake in the ground against the tide that threatened to sweep us away. Still, the sense of being watched grew heavier. Twice that week, I spotted Trent's car idling across the street late at night. Once, Mag swore she saw a shadow at the grocery store, a man ducking behind the produce aisle when she turned. Even in our living room, curtains drawn, it felt as if eyes were on us. Our safe haven had turned into a glass house, fragile and exposed. Finally, I decided to face Trent directly. I invited him to meet me at a diner outside town, hoping that public walls would give me some control. He showed up cheerful, sliding into the booth across from me. I tried to speak plainly, telling him his constant involvement in our affairs was unsettling. He laughed. waving it off with a casual flick of his hand. "You're overthinking, Ethan. Maybe it's time to let the younger generation take care of things." His smile hardened on the last words, and I understood it wasn't advice, it was a warning. As we left the diner, he clapped my shoulder. "Next time we talk," he said, "let's do it somewhere with a better view. Maybe the coast." His tone was light, but the word coast carried the weight of something sinister. The image of jagged cliffs and crashing waves filled my mind. I walked to my car with my heart pounding, knowing we had crossed into dangerous territory. Trent was no longer circling us. He was closing in, and the coast might well be the place where he intended to finish what he had started. If you're still watching and can sense the storm building, write number 4 in the comments to let me know you're ready. Now, let's dive into Chapter 5 where the conflict finally explodes. The invitation arrived in a casual tone, as though nothing in the world was wrong. Lena called, her voice bright but strained, telling us that she and Trent wanted to host a family dinner at their rental cabin by the lake. Mags and I exchanged a look across the kitchen table. We both knew this was no innocent gathering. Yet refusing would only raise more suspicion, and so I agreed, my voice steady though my stomach churned. When we arrived that Friday evening, the scene looked carefully staged. The cabin glowed with warm light, a fire snapping in the hearth, and a table laid out with more food than 4 people could ever eat. Lena greeted us with a hug, her eyes red as if she had been crying, while Trent played the perfect host, pouring wine and carving the roast with exaggerated cheer. It all felt rehearsed, like actors performing a scene they didn't believe in. At first, conversation meandered through safe topics: the weather, Lena's work in Boston, old family stories. But soon, Trent steered the dialogue, as he always did, toward finances. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "have you thought any more about selling that big old house? Imagine the freedom. You and Mags could downsize, travel, enjoy life without the burden." His smile gleamed, but his eyes flicked toward me like a blade. Mags set her fork down with deliberate calm. "That house is our home, Trent. We are not selling it." Her tone was firm, and I felt a surge of pride, but the air in the room shifted, heavy with unsaid words. Lena's hands trembled as she poured water, whispering, "Maybe we can just talk about something else." Trent ignored her, his gaze locked on me. I excused myself, pretending I needed some air. Outside, the night was cool, the lake rippling under the moonlight. As I walked past Trent's truck, something caught my eye in the open bed. A canvas duffel bag half-zipped, ropes coiled neatly inside, along with harnesses and carabiners. I froze. They weren't hikers. None of us were. There was no reason for climbing gear to be here, except for one. My chest tightened as the implications sank in. This was preparation, not recreation. I returned to the cabin, masking the dread coiling in my gut. When I sat down again, Trent leaned back in his chair, swirling wine in his glass. "You know," he said with a smile that no longer bothered to pretend, "you can't hold on forever. Everything you own will pass to us sooner or later. Why not make it easier?" His voice was calm, but beneath it throbbed the rhythm of a threat. The room went silent. Lena's eyes welled with tears, and she pressed a napkin to her mouth, but she didn't speak. Mags reached for my hand under the table, her grip steady. I looked at Trent, seeing the mask peel away, revealing not a son-in-law, but a man cornered by debts and driven by greed. I answered quietly, "We'll decide what to do with our lives and our home, not you." The meal ended in strained politeness. Lena hugged us at the door, whispering, "Please be careful," so softly I almost doubted I heard it. Trent, standing behind her, forced another grin and waved as though nothing had passed between us. But the image of the ropes in his truck and the glint in his eyes stayed with me like a brand. On the drive home, the silence between Mags and me was heavy, broken only by the hum of the tires on the road. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and unwavering. "It's not a question of if anymore. It's when. And we need to be ready." I glanced at her, seeing in her profile the same quiet strength that had carried us through decades of life together. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was resolved. That night, I lay awake listening to the old house groan in the wind. Each creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps on the porch. I thought of the climbing gear, of Trent's words, of Lena's whispered warning. The picture was clear. Pressure had reached its breaking point. He would no longer be content with signatures and forged papers. Violence was coming, and as I stared at the dark ceiling, I realized the time for suspicion was over. We were living on borrowed time, and survival would depend on how quickly we could prepare. I did not sleep the night after that dinner. The weight of Trent's words, the cold gleam in his eyes, and Lena's trembling whisper replayed in my head until the ceiling above me blurred. I listened to the old house shift and creak, sounds I had always found comforting, now twisted into reminders of how fragile everything was. Fear was no longer an occasional visitor. It had moved in, pressing down on my chest with every shallow breath. Yet beneath the fear, another feeling stirred, an undeniable certainty. This was not going to fade. A confrontation was coming, and whether we liked it or not, we would have to choose how to face it. At some point near dawn, Mags rolled toward me, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in it. "We need to decide," she whispered. "Do we go to the police now, or do we gather proof first?" She looked at me with eyes I had known for decades, eyes that had seen me through victories and failures, through raising a child and burying parents. This time, though, they carried the weight of survival. I wanted to believe the police would swoop in, shield us, and end this nightmare. But I knew better. Trent was slippery, clever, always careful to hide behind charm and pretense. Later that morning, I placed an anonymous call to the local police station. I asked, hypothetically, what someone could do if they believed a family member was forging documents or planning harm. The officer's tone was polite but blunt. "Without tangible proof, recordings, witnesses, signed documents, it's your word against theirs. Family disputes are messy, and courts need more than suspicion." I thanked him and hung up, my hand trembling with a mix of anger and helplessness. We were on our own until we could build a case strong enough to withstand his denials. That evening, Mag sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hand resting on a mug of tea gone cold. "Then we play along," she said. "We let him think he's winning. But we record everything, every word, every slip, every hint of his plan. If he thinks he can stage an accident, then we'll make sure the truth survives even if we don't." Her calmness frightened me more than panic would have. It meant she had accepted the danger fully, and that she was ready to gamble our lives on gathering proof. I nodded, because deep down, I knew she was right. I spent the next day preparing. I tested my phone's recording app, disguising it so I could activate it with a quick button press. I dug out an old digital recorder from the back of my desk drawer and tucked it inside my jacket pocket. I even ordered a small USB recorder online, something I could leave hidden in a bag or coat without notice. Each device felt like a shield, flimsy but necessary. If we were going to walk into Trent's trap, we would do it armed with truth. That night, the phone rang again. It was Lena. Her voice was hushed, as though she were speaking from a corner of her house where Trent could not hear. "Dad," she whispered, "please, whatever you do, don't go on any trip with him. Just make an excuse." The desperation in her tone tore at me. I pressed her gently. "Lena, what do you know?" But she only repeated, "Please, promise me." Before I could push further, the line went dead. I sat there with the receiver still against my ear, realizing she knew more than she could admit. She was trying to save us, but she was also trapped, tied by loyalty and fear to the man who endangered us all. As the house settled into silence, I found myself reflecting on fatherhood. I had raised Lena with every lesson I thought mattered: honesty, hard work, loyalty. And now, I was caught in the cruelest paradox. Protecting her meant exposing her husband and possibly destroying her life. To remain silent meant letting her loyalty drag us to our deaths. It was an impossible choice, one that no parent should have to make. Yet I knew the answer. To save her, we first had to save ourselves. The decision was sealed when the phone rang again 2 days later. This time it was Trent, his voice cheerful, almost singing through the line. "Ethan, we've been thinking. It's time for a family hike. The cliffs are gorgeous this time of year, Saturday morning, we'll pick you up. It'll be unforgettable. My heart pounded so hard I thought the receiver might shake in my hand. I swallowed, forcing calm into my voice. We'll be there. When I hung up, Mags looked at me across the table. She said nothing, but she didn't need to. We both understood. The choice had been made. We were walking into the trap, but this time, we would not go blind. If you're still watching and feeling the weight of the impossible choice, type number 6 below so I know you're with me. Now, let's uncover how one decision could mean life or death. The morning of the hike arrived with a brittle kind of brightness, the kind of day when the sun cuts through the air but never warms it. At 7 sharp, Trent and Lena pulled into our driveway. He bounded out of the truck with exaggerated energy, 2 large backpacks slung over his shoulders. "Beautiful day for an adventure," he called, his grin wide and unshakable. Lena followed slowly, her smile forced, her eyes darting to mine as if trying to communicate something she could not say aloud. I helped Mags into the truck, her hand trembling slightly as she steadied herself. I reached into my jacket pocket and pressed the button on the small recorder. A faint click confirmed it was running. If this was to be our last day, the truth would not die with us. The drive to the coast took an hour, filled with Trent's nonstop chatter about views and fresh air, about how lucky we were to have family time together. Lena sat silent, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. I glanced at her reflection in the window. Her lips moved once, forming words she dared not speak. Mag squeezed my hand, her knuckles pale. The rolling green hills gave way to the sharp line of the ocean, glittering and endless. I had never feared the beauty of Maine until that moment. We parked near the trailhead, where gulls wheeled overhead, and the wind carried the tang of salt. Trent handed out water bottles and adjusted the straps on his pack. I noticed the coil of rope sticking out of one side pocket. "Safety first," he said with mock sincerity. Mags caught my eye, and I knew she had seen it too. The first mile of the hike was gentle, winding through spruce and pine. The air was clean, the ground damp with last night's rain. For a fleeting moment, it almost felt like a normal family outing. But the illusion shattered when Trent clapped his hands. "I know a shortcut to the best view," he said, pointing to a narrower path that broke away from the main trail. The ground there was uneven, stones jutting out, the drop-off visible between thin trees. We followed, each step heavier than the last. My boots slipped on loose gravel, and I tightened my grip on Mags's arm. I memorized everything, the twisted pine at the bend, the jagged rock shaped like a spear, details that could matter later if anyone needed to find this place. The wind grew stronger, howling through the cliffs as though warning us to turn back. At the top, the land opened into a ledge overlooking the Atlantic. Waves crashed far below, white spray shooting into the air. It was breathtaking, but all I saw was the drop, the jagged rocks waiting like open jaws. Trent set down his pack and pulled out a camera. "Perfect spot for family photos," he said. "Stand close to the edge so we can get the ocean in the background." His voice had lost its warmth. It was sharp, commanding. I hesitated, holding Mags close. She whispered, "Stay calm." We stepped nearer, the earth beneath our boots crumbling slightly with each movement. Lena stood back, her face pale as chalk. I caught her eyes, pleading silently, but she lowered her gaze. "Closer," Trent urged, his hand twitching as if ready to push. My heart pounded in my throat. I tightened my hold on Mags's arm. The smile on Trent's face vanished, replaced with a flat, determined stare. Then it happened. He lunged. I felt the shove against my chest, sudden and violent. My body tipped backward, the horizon spinning, as I grabbed instinctively for something, anything. My hand caught his sleeve. The force dragged him forward, and for a brief, surreal moment, the three of us were locked together in a grotesque dance at the edge of the world. Then gravity won. We tumbled down the rocky slope, the wind screaming past my ears, Mags's cry torn from her throat. The impact came like thunder, stone against bone, air punched from lungs. Pain exploded in every corner of my body. I tasted blood, felt it seep warm against my lips. For a heartbeat, I thought it was over. Then I heard Mags's voice, hoarse but fierce, right beside me. "Pretend we're dead," she whispered. "Don't move." Through half-closed eyes, I saw shadows above us. Trent groaned, cursing, his own body battered by the fall. He was alive. His voice carried down the rocks, angry, frantic. "They're gone." It worked. I forced myself to remain still, breath shallow, every muscle screaming to move. Mags lay beside me, her hand brushing mine, her grip weak but steady. I understood in that moment. Survival depended on silence, on the cruel art of pretending death. As Trent stumbled and shouted to Lena about the accident, I let my eyes close fully. The waves roared below, the wind whipped across the cliff, and I listened with a pounding heart as our fate was rewritten above us. Pain was the first thing I felt when the darkness receded. It radiated through my chest, sharp and unrelenting, each breath like swallowing glass. My head pounded in rhythm with my heartbeat, and the copper taste of blood coated my tongue. For a moment, I thought I was alone at the bottom of the gorge, broken and waiting for death. Then Mags's voice pierced the haze, a whisper so fragile I almost believed it was part of a dream. "Don't move," she breathed. "He's still up there." I kept my eyes closed, willing myself to remain still. Above, I could hear the faint crunch of footsteps and the low murmur of voices. Trent's tone carried authority, rehearsed and sharp, while Lena's sounded tremulous, a note of panic threaded through every word. "We'll tell them Ethan slipped," Trent said, his voice echoing faintly down the cliff face. "He pulled Mags with him." "It was an accident," Lena's reply shook. "Trent, this is wrong," he snapped back. "Do you want everything we've planned to collapse? Stick to the story." My heart hammered against my ribs, not just from fear, but from the knowledge that the recorder in my jacket pocket was still running. Every word he spoke, every detail of the stage narrative was being captured, proof, thin, fragile, and yet enough to keep me clinging to life. I shifted my hand slightly, just enough to find Mags's fingers. Her palm was slick with blood, but the squeeze she gave me was firm. "Broken arm," she whispered through clenched teeth. "But alive." Relief cut through my pain. I forced the smallest nod, though the movement sent white-hot agony shooting down my neck. We both knew what survival required: absolute silence, absolute stillness. If Trent suspected we were alive, he would finish the job without hesitation. Hours passed in torturous slow motion. The sun crawled across the sky, shadows deepening around us. Every so often I heard Trent pacing above, his boots crunching on loose gravel, his voice sharp as he rehearsed the story again. Lena barely answered, her sobs carried on the wind, but her silence meant complicity. Mags and I lay motionless, blood drying on our skin, fighting the urge to groan or shift when the pain grew unbearable. As the afternoon waned, I knew we couldn't stay exposed where we had fallen. Inch by inch, with every bone in my body protesting, I dragged myself toward a hollow between two boulders. Mags followed, gritting her teeth against the pain. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony rolling through us, but the shallow dip shielded us from view. There, partially hidden by stone and brush, we collapsed, panting in silence. In that pocket of painful stillness, memories surfaced unbidden. I saw Lena as a child, chasing fireflies in our backyard, her laughter rising like music into the summer night. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike, her small hands gripping the handlebars with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I thought of the bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the way she used to run to me after school as if nothing in the world mattered more. How had those bright eyes turned into the haunted gaze I saw at the dinner table? How had my daughter become tethered to a man whose greed and desperation had dragged her into this abyss? The questions burned deeper than any wound. The truth I hated admitting pressed against me. My silence had played a part. I had ignored the small signs, Trent's arrogance, the subtle control he exerted over her, the way she had grown quiet around him. I had wanted to believe in her happiness, even if it meant turning away from shadows I should have confronted years ago. And now we were here, lying broken at the bottom of a gorge, trapped between loyalty to a daughter and the instinct to survive. Night crept in, the air cooling, the sky above streaked with fading orange. My body shivered uncontrollably. Every breath a jagged knife. Mags's hand found mine again. "We'll make it," she whispered. "We have to." Her resolve, even in that state, steadied me. I realized then that our only chance was to hold the act until help arrived. Trent would call for rescue eventually. He had to. He needed a narrative, a performance, and for that, there had to be bodies. When they found us, I would remain as still as possible until we were under safe hands. Then, and only then, would the truth come alive. As the last light faded, I closed my eyes fully, my chest rising shallowly, my grip on Mags tightening. Above, Trent's footsteps retreated, his voice drifting farther away as he prepared for his performance of grief. In the hollow where we hid, we lay together, bloodied, battered, but alive, pretending to be corpses, waiting for the chance to rise again with the truth. If you're still here and holding your breath through every moment, drop number 8 in the comments to let me know. Now, let's move forward and see how survival depends on silence and patience. The sound of helicopter blades grew louder until the air trembled with their rhythm. Voices echoed across the gorge, sharp and urgent, as ropes unfurled down the cliff. I kept my body still, limbs limp, breaths shallow. Beside me, Mags mirrored my stillness, her hand a faint weight on mine. Above, Trent's voice rose in practiced anguish. "Please, help them!" They slipped. It all happened so fast. His sobs were convincing, a performance honed from greed and fear. The rescuers reached us, their boots clanging against rock. A paramedic leaned close, fingers searching my neck. "Pulse faint but present," he called up. Another voice followed. "This one's critical too." I let their hands strap me to the stretcher, resisting every instinct to open my eyes. The plan was fragile but necessary. Play dead until safety was certain. We were lifted through the air, the roar of the helicopter swallowing everything. Inside, paramedics swarmed us, calling out vitals, pressing oxygen masks to our faces. I kept my eyelids closed, listening. Then Trent's voice slipped through the noise. He leaned close, his words dripping venom, meant only for me. "I hope you learned, old man. Questions kill." But he was not alone. A nurse stood on the other side of the stretcher. I felt the pause in her movements, the sudden tension in the air. She had heard. I clung to that fragile hope as the helicopter cut through the sky. At the hospital, chaos erupted, wheels rattling, orders shouted, fluorescent lights blinding even through closed lids. I stayed limp, only cracking my eyes when I heard a new voice. Calm, professional, carrying authority. "Detective Johnson, Portland PD, what have we got?" The nurse spoke quickly. "They're alive, sir, and there's something you need to hear." Hours blurred as doctors tended to us, splinting Mags's arm, wrapping my ribs, stitching gashes. Finally, in the quiet of a recovery room, I opened my eyes fully. The detective leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, if you can speak, we need the truth." My throat burned, but I forced the words out. "My son-in-law tried to kill us. He pushed us, and I have proof." With trembling hands, I motioned toward my jacket, folded on a chair. The recorder was still inside, its light blinking weakly. The detective clicked it on. Trent's voice filled the room, casual talk about cliffs, the insistence on the story, the venom of his threats. Mags added in a hoarse whisper, "He forged documents too." The lawyer, Conrad Avery, can confirm. Minutes later, Conrad himself appeared, summoned by the police. He carried files in his arms and placed them on the desk. These were brought to me. Healthcare proxy, insurance changes, all falsified. Ethan warned me. I didn't realize how deep it ran until now. The pieces locked together, undeniable. Down the hall, Trent and Lena sat in the waiting area, cloaked in sorrow. Officers approached quietly, their presence deliberate. "Trent Holloway, Lena Holloway," one said firmly, "you are under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy." Shock rippled across their faces. Trent sprang up, rage breaking through the mask. "This is insane. They're dead." His voice cracked when he saw me wheeled past, very much alive, eyes fixed on him. Lena broke first. "It was his idea," she cried, pointing at her husband. "He planned everything. I begged him to stop." Trent snarled, "You pushed me to it." "You wanted their house." Their alliance dissolved into chaos, accusations flying as officers cuffed them and led them away. From my bed, I watched, hollow and exhausted. When Trent passed close, I summoned what strength remained. "You didn't just try to kill us," I told him quietly. "You killed the family you thought you'd inherit." He froze, eyes blazing with hatred, before the officers pulled him down the hall. Silence settled after the storm. Machines beeped steadily. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, and I felt Mags's hand slip into mine. We were alive, bruised, broken, scarred in ways no doctor could heal, but alive. As night fell outside the hospital window, I understood the cost of survival. We had faced betrayal so complete it had nearly destroyed us. Yet, in the end, truth had survived the fall, and with it, so had we. The weeks that followed blurred into hearings, statements, and long hours under the harsh lights of a courtroom. Trent sat across from us in his prison uniform, his once polished face hardened by anger and defeat. Lena avoided my eyes, her expression an exhausted mask that cracked only when her lawyer whispered in her ear. The trial dragged every secret into the open. The forged documents, the debts, the recordings from my pocket. When the verdicts came, there was no cheer in my heart, only a hollow ache. Life sentences, justice on paper, but justice does not stitch broken trust or heal wounds carved by betrayal. Mags and I left the courthouse hand in hand, leaning on each other more heavily than ever before. Reporters clamored for sound bites, cameras flashing, but their noise felt distant, as though we were underwater. For them, our story was another headline, another scandal to fill a column. For us, it was the slow process of relearning how to breathe. Back at our coastal home, the silence pressed against us. Every room carried echoes of what almost ended here. Our laughter at the dinner table, our quiet evenings by the fire, our whispered fears after Trent's threats. Even the walls seemed to know the weight of survival. We tried to settle back into old rhythms, but nothing was the same. Mag sat by the window often, staring at the sea, her arm in a sling, her gaze far away. I moved through the house with caution, as though one false step might summon the shadows back. I thought often of Lena. The girl who once chased fireflies barefoot through the yard now sat behind steel bars. I grieved for her, as though she had died, because in truth, the daughter I raised no longer existed. In her place was someone twisted by fear, loyalty, and greed. Did I fail her by not speaking sooner? Did silence become the soil where betrayal grew? I may never know. What I do know is this: family by blood can wound deeper than any enemy. And yet, even in the ruins, we found a flicker of hope. The grandchildren, innocent, wide-eyed, bewildered, came into our care. Social services asked if we were willing, and though the weight felt immense, we said yes. Their small hands reached for ours without hesitation. And in that moment, I understood that survival was not just for ourselves. It was for them too. They deserved a chance to grow up in a home where love was not a weapon, where trust was not currency. Each bedtime story, each breakfast pancake, became an act of rebuilding what greed had tried to erase. I learned something in those long, sleepless nights. Possessions can be stolen, signatures can be forged, and even bodies can be broken. But dignity endures if you fight for it. Greed tried to silence us, but truth gave us a voice. And silence, I realized, is deadlier than betrayal. It was speaking, through whispers, through recordings, through testimony, that saved us. 1 year after the fall, I stood again at the cliffs, the Atlantic roaring below. The sky was painted in orange and violet, gulls wheeling overhead. I leaned on a cane, ribs healed but still tender, the memory of pain stitched deep into my wounds. Mag stood beside me, her arm looped through mine. This time, we weren't afraid. We looked out at the endless horizon, not as victims, but as survivors who had endured the worst and still found reason to keep going. I gripped her hand, warm and steady. "We made it," I whispered. She nodded, her eyes wet but resolute. The sea thundered, eternal and untamed, a reminder of how small we are and how precious each breath can be. Greed nearly destroyed us. Betrayal carved scars we will carry to our graves. But love, quiet, stubborn, unyielding, carried us through the fall. That, more than any inheritance, more than any possession, is what I choose to leave behind. Not bitterness, not fear, but the truth that even in the face of the deepest betrayal, love can be the last word. Life has a way of revealing truths in the most brutal of moments. We move through the world believing our foundations are steady, that family, trust, and loyalty are unshakable pillars. Yet, it is often within those very bonds that the deepest fractures can form. Betrayal does not arrive as a stranger at the door. It grows quietly within, nurtured by silence, greed, or the refusal to confront shadows before they take shape. And when it finally strikes, it can dismantle not only trust, but also the very meaning of belonging. The journey through suffering, however, is not solely about loss. It is also about the discovery of resilience that lies buried beneath fear. Pain reveals what we are capable of enduring, forcing us to confront the fragility of flesh and bone while unearthing the durability of spirit. In every breath taken against despair, there is a quiet act of defiance. Choosing to endure, even when broken and battered, becomes a statement that the will to live and to protect truth is stronger than the schemes built on lies. In such moments, survival becomes more than physical. It becomes moral. To remain silent in the face of betrayal is to allow deceit to claim victory. Speaking the truth, no matter how painful, restores dignity to what has been stolen. Truth once spoken has a way of reshaping the narrative, turning what was meant to be an ending into a beginning. It is not the betrayal that defines a legacy, but the courage to resist it. And yet, survival is not without scars. No one emerges untouched. There will always be remnants of fear that whisper in the dark, memories of trust shattered, echoes of choices that can never be undone. These scars, however, carry their own meaning. They are reminders that endurance is possible. They bear witness to battles fought not with weapons, but with resolve, patience, and the refusal to surrender. They speak of strength gained in the very moments when weakness seemed inevitable. Amidst the rubble of betrayal lies an opportunity to rebuild. What has been broken can never be restored to its former shape, but from the pieces something new can be made, something defined not by fear, but by wisdom. The act of rebuilding is not about erasing pain. It is about transforming it into purpose. It is about teaching those who come after that dignity is worth more than wealth, that truth is worth more than comfort, and that love, when uncorrupted, endures beyond every wound. For love remains the quiet force that withstands storms. It is the hand held through pain, the voice that whispers encouragement when despair creeps close, the shared silence that says more than words ever could. Love does not erase betrayal, but it gives meaning to survival. It reminds us that though greed can corrode, though lies can wound, there is still something unyielding that carries us through. Love is the final answer to the cruelty of deception. In the end, what matters is not the possessions accumulated, nor the illusions of control we cling to. What matters is the truth we leave behind. The example that dignity cannot be stolen, that resilience cannot be forged by deceit, that even in the face of the most profound betrayal, it is possible to rise with something greater than bitterness. The legacy left is not one of pain, but of endurance, of choosing light when darkness sought to consume. So, let the cliffs, the falls, the nights of terror stand as symbols not of defeat, but of the strength to continue. Let every scar remind us that survival is never meaningless if it teaches us to value honesty, to guard against silence, and to cling to the simple, stubborn force of love. In a world where betrayal may come from the places we least expect, the true triumph lies not in avoiding pain, but in emerging from it with truth in our hearts and the courage to keep walking forward. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.